Hi, we are Valentina, Kristen, Corey, and Arnaldo, and we are group three. We are presenting our project, Identifying Academically at-Risk Students, a data-driven early intervention system. So here's a quick breakdown of what we're going to be covering. We're going to start off with the problem we're tackling and the goal of our project. Then we're going to go into the information about the data set and our pre-processing steps. And then we'll get into exploratory data analysis of the present data and a walkthrough of our prediction models. And then we'll do our final results and recommendations and where to go from there. Okay, so academic success is a huge factor in a student's future, but many high schools still struggle to support every student effectively. We focus on early identification because catching students before they fall behind can make all the difference. Our findings can be helpful to students, parents, school administrators, and policymakers who want to boost student engagement and retention. Going over the data, our data source is synthetic data created for educational purposes on Kaggle, and the data size is about 2,392 high school students. And it captures several important areas like demographics such as age, gender, and ethnicity, study habits like weekly study hours and absences, parental information like education level and involvement, extracurricular participation, and then finally academic performance through GPA and grade classification. Getting deeper into the variables. Age is broken down as grade level. Since they're only the ages from 15 to 18, we correlated it with freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. Because the data set did not provide grade levels, we assumed that the grade level progression follows the typical age to grade model. So this maps serves as like a proxy for grade level to identify the grade levels in our data set. Then we have gender, encoded as 0 for male, 1 for female. Then ethnicity is broken down into Caucasian, African American, Asian, and other. Then we'll have parental education going from none to higher education. And then absences. Absences are ranged from 0 to 30 days. Study time, our hours spent during the week is ranging from 0 to 20 hours. And then tutoring is encoded as 0 for no and 1 for yes. Parental support ranges from none to very high. And then we have extracurricular. It indicates whether a student participates in an activity outside of sports, music, or volunteering. It represents involvement in other types of extracurriculars, and it's encoded as 0 for no and 1 for yes. And it's the same for sports, music, and volunteering, encoded as 0 for no and 1 for yes. And then we're going to go into the insights, and Arnold will take over.
Hi, I'm Arnold. I'm going to be going over the key insights from our EDA. We started our EDA by looking at the demographic distributions across the student population. In the first pie chart, we looked at the distribution of the students by ethnicity. And unlike the other variables on the slide, this one was a bit more unbalanced. The Caucasian group making up just over half of the student population, while the remaining half was divided among the three other groups. African American and Asians took about 20%, and the rest was labeled other that took up about 9.3%. Next, we looked at the breakdown between the grade levels. As Tina mentioned, we use the age as a proxy since we didn't have that data available to us. The distribution is fairly balanced, with each grade level taking up about a quarter of the total. The balance is helpful because it means that we're getting a well-rounded view of all the students across all levels, with no overrepresentation of any grade level. Lastly, on this slide, we looked at the grade distribution, the gender distribution. This is also split pretty evenly, about 50-50. This also means that we're getting a pretty good representation from both genders. And on to the next slide. Looking at these graphs, we started by looking at the distribution of parental educational levels. The largest group of parents who had completed some college, followed by those who have a high school diploma. Much fewer students had parents with a bachelor's degree or education beyond that, and a little over 200 had parents with no formal education at all. This means that because of this matters because the parental education often influences how much students' academic support or value is placed on schooling at home. Moving on to the graph on the top right, here we compared GPA between students who participated in sports versus those who didn't. The GPA distribution is fairly similar, but there's some slight upward shift in the median for those who played sports. This could suggest that involvement in athletics may have a small positive impact on academic performance, possibly due to the minimum grade requirements for student athletes. On the bottom left, the chart breaks students into two categories: those who participated in multiple extracurricular activities, or those who participated on either one or none. We saw that the students who were involved in multiple activities had higher median GPA, and slightly less spread, showing more consistent performance overall. This suggests that the more engagement outside of the class could contribute to better outcomes. Lastly, the box plot on the bottom right shows that the GPA distribution across different levels of parental support. Here we have a visible trend as support increases from none to very high. The average GPA also increases. Students with no parental support had the lowest overall GPAs, while those with high or very high support performed better. On to the next slide. So on the top left graph, we plotted the overall distribution of GPA scores across all students. The curve follows a fairly normal distribution with a peak at around 2.0. We added a vertical line to mark the failing threshold, which helps us visually separate the students who are academically at risk. As you can see, there's a significant portion of students that fall below or near that threshold, reinforcing the importance of early intervention. Next, we looked at the pass-fail outcomes split by gender. The number of female students and male students is almost even, and the pass and fail rates are very similar between the both groups. This means that gender does not strongly correlate with student performance. On the bottom left graph, we can see that the pass-fail rates are broken down by ethnicity. The Caucasian group makes up the largest portion of the data set and shows relatively higher pass rates. African American and Asian students have slightly lower pass rates in comparison to the other, while the other category had the smallest number of students overall. Lastly, we looked at the pass-fail rates across grade levels using age as a proxy. Freshmen had the highest pass rate, while seniors had the lowest, with a failure rate gradually increasing with each grade level. This trend could be due to a combination of factors like academic pressure, disengagement, and upper grades, or more challenging coursework.
So the first model we looked at was a linear regression model. This was designed to predict the continuous variable of the raw GPA scores based on a range of academic support and extracurricular factors. This was done first just to see which variables most correlated with the GPA scores and to see their actual numerical impact on GPA. The data set was split into 60% training and 40% testing. The model was first ran with all of the variables, and then that result was then trimmed down based on how significant each of those variables was. And then the final model, which is shown on the left, only contains the variables that were statistically significant, so they all had a p-value of less than 0.05. And we can see that the adjusted R squared for this model was 0.952. So the model explains roughly around 95% of the variance of GPA. And we see that the variables were study time, absences, tutoring, parental support, and if the student was involved in extracurriculars, sports, or music. This model was then later used on the testing data set, and this had resulted in a mean square error of 0.04, and the testing data set had an R squared of 0.96. So the model did a pretty good job at fitting the testing set. And on the graph on the right, you can see um, a plot of just the predicted GPA versus the actual GPA. And next slide, please. And then so for the next model we made was a decision tree. And this was made to predict the student's grade class, which was based on a scale of, excuse me, it wasn't not a scale, but it was classified as 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And the variables selected for this decision tree were the same variables from the linear regression model. The decision tree used entropy as its criterion and a max depth of 5, as this helped improve the accuracy of the tree. And you can see from that top image that the first split in the tree was absences being less than or equal to 10.5, which obviously suggests that attendance is a very important factor in whether students achieve higher grades or not. And then you can see that the second splits were also based on absences. So the model seems to place a strong emphasis on absences for classification. And then on the image on the bottom, um, you can see that the model performed well for class 4 with the F1 score of 0.88. But for the other classes of 0, 1, 2, and 3, it did not perform quite as good. And this could be because that class 4 is makes up a little over half of the entire data set. So this um, decision tree model may be biased a little bit towards predicting class 4. And then this is just the full tree, and you can see that it has the depth of 5.
Right, so we also used k-means clustering to analyze our data, and we use this so that way we could create student profiles with specific variables that affect student GPA. So the decision tree helped us is a model to help determine if a student is going to fail or not, or like what GPA they'll have, and our k-means clustering helps us dig into the specifics of what leads to a student's GPA. So looking at this initial scatter plot, we're comparing study time to GPA, and there's no clear clusters that are visible. So we're not able to predict a number of optimal clusters for our analysis. But study time and GPA were used here as the variables for the scatter plot because they were the only variables that would work well together for a scatter plot, as the majority of the other variables used 0 or 1 to denote no or yes. Next slide, please. So to figure out the number of optimal clusters to use, we found like the silhouette score, and we used the elbow method. The silhouette method shows that 2 clusters is optimal, and the elbow method shows 4 clusters to be optimal. So looking at the breakdown, what we did was see how evenly distributed the different clusters were. And for 2 clusters and 4 clusters, it's relatively even, but we decided to go with 4 clusters for further analysis because there were 5 different grade classes. So the 4 clusters would spread out the data a bit more and give us, more accurate results to determine what leads to a student's GPA and whether they'd be passing or failing. So here is The same scatter plot, but split up into the 4 clusters. So we see that there's 4 distinct groups. There's low study time, high GPA. There's high study time, low GPA, low study time, low GPA, and high study time, high GPA. And looking at that data in box plot form, we can see that clusters 1 and 2 have the lowest average GPAs. Both of those are in a failing range, and clusters 0 and 3 are in a passing range. But looking at the box plots for study time by cluster, cluster 1, while the average GPA is failing, it has a high amount of study time on average. And cluster 2 is our low GPA, low study time cluster. So this shows us that, more study time doesn't always mean a higher GPA, and more study time doesn't mean success because it may not be productive study time. So these could be students that, need more support to be more productive with their studying to have more success. And then comparing the GPA by cluster to grade class by cluster, we can see that the majority of the students in clusters 1 and 2 are failing students. So that aligns with, previous results that we got with the clustering. Right, and then each cluster has a variety of student ages. So the order of highest to lowest average GPA varies by cluster as well for the different ages, or, as we said before, it was, we associated the ages to what grade they were in high school, whether freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So in cluster 2, which had the lowest average GPA, the lowest performing age is 15 or high school freshman. And this leads us to believe that students entering high school may need extra support to be successful so that they don't remain failing throughout high school. And in cluster 1, it's the 17-year-olds or the high school juniors that have the lowest average GPA. And this aligns with junior year generally being considered the hardest because it's the last full year that colleges will see when students apply. And it's also the year that most students take the SAT or ACT. So there's a lot of pressure. So even though the ages are, pretty close together and it varies by cluster, we can still find pieces of information that help us find certain students to target for extra support. And then something that was of interest to us was seeing if students that participate in sports made a difference, because we tend to associate student athletes with being, higher performing students because of their requirements to stay on the team. And even though in clusters 1 and 2, they are still in a failing range, we can still say that overall student athletes are higher achievers than non-student athletes, which related to the insight in our EDA. So it would be good to encourage students to participate in sports and other extracurriculars. So that way, we can help them to really be higher achievers because the data shows that they would be.
So to summarize some of the results, it looks like the regression model performed well and provided some insight on the variables that did correlate with the raw GPA scores. It also looked like parental support, absences, and tutoring were some of the biggest effects on GPA. In the case of absences, obviously this has a negative effect on GPA. And while there were some variables like sports and music that were correlated with higher GPAs, these might require taking a closer look at, as even though they are correlated, they might not directly lead to better performance in school. But this would just be something that would have to be just more um, looked at more closely. Looks like the decision tree performed strongly for the GPA class of 4, which was classified as an F, but not so well for the other classes. And like mentioned earlier, this is possibly due to the weight of class 4. However, the tree does reinforce the fact that absences are highly correlated with worse performance in school. And it also, on the right side of the tree, you could see that the tree also showed that less study time also meant worse GPA, um, the worst GPA as well.
And then to reiterate, our clustering gave us 4 groups of students to focus on that we could analyze further. So we had the students that had low amount of study time, but had a really high GPA. We had students with higher study time, but still had a low GPA because their study time may have not been as productive to help them be successful. We have low study time and low GPA, and then the students with high study time and high GPA. And from our results before, we know that there was a little bit of variation in how these in the rest of the results from these clusters.
So, as for recommendations for the students and parents, one of our key takeaways was the importance of consistent self-tracking and communication. We recommend encouraging students to check in weekly just to reflect on progress and spot issues early on. Peer tutoring is also a good program. It's just another support tool, and it gives students the the opportunity to be able to help other students and to just build a community amongst them students. Creating at-home study plans and developing consistent routines can also help students who lack structure outside of the classroom. The goal is to give both students and their families the tools that they need to stay engaged and stay ahead of the academic struggles. For students, for teachers, we recommend that using dashboards that display flags or flag students who are at risk and show indicators like low GPA or high absences, and clear and frequent communication between students, teachers, and parents can also help prevent small issues that may end up becoming major setbacks later on. Finding ways to boost student involvement, whether it's through clubs, sports, or other activities, since engagement often correlates in better academic outcomes, could help as well.
And then also with policymakers, investing in support systems like teaching parents the power of support, as that does play a role in a student's GPA, and then also funding tutoring programs as preventative measures. Also incentivizing extracurricular participation with like higher budgets for support for sports and performing arts, because I've seen in the data it does make a difference. And then also with mandating early intervention tools like high absence monitoring systems could help the process of the students, the teachers, the school administrators flow better and help students prevent a failing grade. And that's it. Thank you.